The screen glowed with a harsh blue light as the execution was broadcast across every planet in the galactic hegemony. Admiral Elizabeth Winters stood frozen, her eyes locked on the figure kneeling in the center of an alien courtyard. General Joseph Carter, his uniform stripped of insignia, faced his executioners with his head held high. "This can't be happening," whispered Elizabeth, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the conference table. Around her, the Joint Chiefs of Staff watched in stunned silence. The hegemony executioner, a tall Vexari with scale-like skin, read the charges in the formal, clicking language of the Imperial Court. A translator's voice provided the standard galactic overlay. General Joseph Carter of Earth, found guilty of espionage against the galactic hegemony, conspiracy to incite rebellion, and violations of Imperial Security Code 5690, has been sentenced to immediate termination. No trial had been public. No evidence had been presented to Earth's government. Carter had been arrested during a diplomatic mission to the hegemony's capital world 3 weeks ago, and had not been heard from since. Elizabeth felt sick. Joseph had been her mentor, her friend. He was the most honest person she knew, a man who believed in the peaceful integration of humanity into the galactic community. This was murder, plain and simple. The blade fell. Elizabeth turned away, but the sound came through clearly. Someone in the room sobbed. "Record off," ordered General Paul Jackson, the oldest of the Joint Chiefs. The screen went black, but the damage was done. Every human with access to a communication device had just watched the hegemony execute Earth's highest-ranking diplomatic representative. The door to the conference room slid open. A young aide rushed in, face pale. "Madam Admiral, the hegemony ambassador is requesting an immediate audience with the president. He's already at the White House." "Of course he is," Elizabeth said, her voice cold. "They murder our general and then want to explain why we should thank them for it." She straightened her uniform and looked around at her colleagues. "I'm going to the White House. The rest of you, initiate Defense Protocol Omega. Quietly. I'm not back in 2 hours, you know what to do." The drive to the White House took 15 minutes. By then, the streets were already filling with angry protesters. News of Carter's execution had spread like wildfire. Elizabeth saw signs being hastily made, people shouting at public screens. Humanity had been part of the hegemony for only 30 years, the newest and least respected members of the 2,000-year-old empire. But they had worked hard, followed the rules, earned their place. Until today, President Allison Murray was waiting in the Oval Office with the hegemony ambassador. Krelvox was tall even for a Zentari, nearly 7 feet of blue-gray skin and cold compound eyes. He wore the ceremonial shell of his rank, decorated with the symbols of 100 conquered species. "Admiral Winters," he greeted her with a slight nod. "I was explaining to your president the regrettable necessity of today's action." "Regrettable?" Elizabeth fought to keep her voice steady. "You murdered our general without trial." "There was a trial," Krelvox said, his mandibles clicking slightly in what Elizabeth recognized as amusement. "By our laws, not yours. General, Carter was planning an insurrection against the hegemony. We have proof." "Show us," demanded President Murray, her normally gentle face hard with anger. The ambassador waved a long-fingered hand dismissively. "The evidence is classified, but the Hegemony Council was unanimous in its judgment. Carter was using his position to assess our weaknesses, gathering intelligence for a potential human uprising." Elizabeth felt cold rage building inside her. "That's a lie." "Be careful, Admiral," Krelvox warned. "Accusations against the Hegemony Council are themselves treasonous." President Murray stepped between them. "Ambassador, I believe it would be best if you returned to your embassy. Earth needs time to process this event." "Of course." The ambassador bowed slightly. "The hegemony understands that lesser species require time to accept imperial justice." After he left, Elizabeth turned to the president. "We have to respond to this. Carter was innocent." Murray nodded slowly. "I've called an emergency session of the United Earth Congress for tomorrow morning. Admiral, I need everything we have on Carter's last mission. And contact Major Daniels from Intelligence. If anyone can find out what really happened, it's him. Elizabeth saluted and turned to leave, but the President's voice stopped her. And Elizabeth? Prepare the fleet. I have a feeling we're going to need it. The United Earth Congress had never been so full. Representatives from every human colony and territory packed the Grand Hall in Geneva. The mood was grim. Giant screens displayed General Carter's face, a still image from before his execution. He smiled slightly in his formal uniform, unaware of his fate. President Allison Murray stood at the podium, her face drawn and tired after a sleepless night. The murmur of voices died as she raised her hand. 24 hours ago, we witnessed a crime, she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall, not just against General Carter, but against all of humanity. She gestured to someone at the side of the stage. Major Frank Daniels from Military Intelligence has something the hegemony doesn't want us to see. Major Daniels walked to the podium, carrying a small data device. He was a plain-looking man with sharp eyes and a serious face. Few outside intelligence circles knew his name, but Elizabeth Winters, sitting in the front row, knew he was the best analyst Earth had. Last night, my team intercepted communications between members of the Hegemony Council, Daniels said, connecting his device to the hall's system. They were not encrypted because the hegemony believes their quantum channels are unbreakable. They were wrong. The screens changed to show text and translation of an alien conversation. The representatives leaned forward as they read. As you can see, Daniels continued, the execution was planned 3 months ago. General Carter wasn't arrested because of any crime. He was arrested because he was becoming too influential. Too respected by other species. The Hegemony Council decided to make an example of the humans to remind everyone of their place. A wave of anger swept through the hall. Elizabeth felt her hands shaking with rage. Joseph had died not for anything he'd done, but because he'd been too good at his job. President Murray returned to the podium. The evidence is clear. This was not justice. This was a message. The hegemony sees us as subjects, not partners. They believe they can kill our people without consequence. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. I am here to tell you that they are wrong. The hall erupted in applause and shouts. Murray waited for quiet to return. I am proposing an immediate withdrawal from the galactic hegemony and a formal declaration of war. Silence fell. War against the hegemony was unthinkable. They ruled 10,000 worlds across 3 galactic arms. They had never lost a war in 2,000 years. Elizabeth watched the faces around her shift from shock to determination. Humanity had only reached the stars a century ago. They were outnumbered and outgunned. But they had been preparing, quietly, ever since joining the hegemony and discovering how it truly operated. The vote took less than 5 minutes. It was unanimous. Ambassador Catherine Ross will deliver our declaration, Murray announced, and Admiral Winters will coordinate our military response. Elizabeth stood and walked to the podium when the president called her name. She looked out at the representatives of humanity and spoke the words she had prepared through the night. The hegemony believes we are weak. They believe we will accept their tyranny because we are afraid. They don't understand humanity. She straightened to her full height. We have been building our forces in secret since we first encountered the hegemony. Operation Thunderclap is ready. Our fleet is mobilizing from the shipyards of Jupiter. The Mars defense platforms are online, and our agents across hegemony space await their activation codes. Gasps echoed through the hall. Few had known the extent of humanity's preparations. By tomorrow, the galaxy will know that humanity does not accept the execution of our people. We do not bow to tyrants, and we are not afraid. The speech was broadcast across Earth and all human colonies. As Elizabeth left the stage, her comm unit beeped. Admiral Jackson was calling from Lunar Command. The Hegemony Council is laughing at our declaration, he reported. Their ambassador called it the tantrum of children. Elizabeth smiled grimly. Let them laugh. Activate all sleeper cells. Deploy the fleet. We strike at dawn. Across the solar system, Humanity prepared for war. Ships emerged from hidden bases, weapons that had never been revealed to the hegemony were brought online, and in distant star systems, human agents received their orders. The hegemony had ruled through fear for 2 millennia. They were about to learn what real fear was. Captain William Boyd checked his tactical display as his stealth ship approached the hegemony research facility on Europa 9. His squad of 20 elite soldiers waited in the deployment bay, their faces calm but focused. They had trained for this mission for years, though none had expected to actually carry it out. 5 minutes to insertion, his pilot announced. William nodded. Status of their sensors? Still blind, sir. They have no idea we're here. The hegemony believed their detection systems were unbeatable. They didn't know that Dr. Susan Grant and her team had cracked their sensor technology 3 years ago. Humanity had kept this secret, along with many others. All units, final check, William ordered through his comm. Remember, we need those research files intact. Europa 9 housed one of the hegemony's most advanced weapons labs. Taking it would give humanity access to technology that could help level the playing field. The ship touched down silently on the facility's outer landing pad. Security systems remained dormant, fooled by the human codes that identified the craft as a scheduled maintenance vessel. Go, 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 William whispered. His team moved with practiced precision. 4 years of drills in an exact replica of this facility made every step familiar. They encountered the first guards at the main security door, 2 tall Zentari who barely had time to look surprised before stun rounds dropped them to the floor. No fatalities unless absolutely necessary, William reminded his team. These guards are just doing their jobs. They secured the main research level in under 10 minutes. The hegemony scientists, mostly Ilthuri with their distinctive 6-fingered hands, stared in shock as human soldiers entered their supposedly secret facility. Dr. Lyra Moss, the team's science officer, immediately began downloading files from the central database. Captain, you need to see this, she called after a few moments. William looked over her shoulder at the display. Is that what I think it is? Yes, sir. Plans for a planet-killer weapon. According to these files, it's designed specifically to target Earth. William felt cold anger rise in his chest. How long until deployment? They were 3 months from completion. We got here just in time. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out as Operation Thunderclap unfolded. Lieutenant George Martinez and his tech team infiltrated the hegemony's automated defense grid control center in the Rigel system. Their mission: sabotage the network that protected hegemony military installations. I need 2 more minutes, George told his security team as his fingers flew over the alien interface. After years studying captured hegemony tech, he could read and write their code almost as well as the hegemony engineers themselves. Hurry, urged Sergeant Lisa Patel, watching the door. Their patrol is due back any second. George nodded without looking up. Almost there. The console flashed green as his virus entered the system. Throughout hegemony space, defense grids began to fail subtly, creating gaps that would be invisible unless someone was specifically looking for them. Gaps that the human fleet would exploit in the coming attack. Done. Let's move. Meanwhile, Admiral Elizabeth Winters stood on the bridge of the Earth flagship Freedom as it led the assault fleet toward the hegemony's Orion Arm headquarters. The ship hummed with energy as its advanced drive system, developed in secret and, never revealed to the hegemony, pushed it far faster than any alien vessel could match. Status report, she ordered. Commander Aaron Phillips looked up from his station. Boyd's team has secured the weapon research facility. Martinez has compromised their defense grid. Dr. Grant reports that their quantum communication network has been successfully infiltrated. All targets in the first wave have been neutralized or captured. Elizabeth nodded. And our surprise? Ready when you are, Admiral. She looked at the tactical display showing the massive space station that served as the hegemony's military command center for this sector of the galaxy. It was defended by a fleet of warships and automated weapon platforms, a force that should have been able to destroy any attacker. Send the signal. Throughout the hegemony fleet, hidden programs activated. Weapon systems went offline, engines stalled, communications failed. The sabotage had been years in the making, sleeper agents and corrupted maintenance routines planting, the seeds of failure that now bloomed. The hegemony fleet is disabled, reported Commander Phillips. Minimal casualties. Elizabeth nodded in satisfaction. Open a channel to their command station. The face of a stunned hegemony admiral appeared on screen. Behind him, chaos reigned as officers tried desperately to understand what was happening. "This is Admiral Elizabeth Winters of Earth," she said, calmly. "Your forces are disabled. Your weapons are offline. Surrender your station." "Impossible," the alien sputtered. "You're just humans." Elizabeth smiled coldly. "Yes, we are, and you should have thought of that before you executed our general." News of humanity's successful attack spread quickly across the galaxy. The hegemony tried to control the information, but too many ships and stations had gone silent. Too many emergency signals had been sent. The truth was impossible to hide. On the planet Karathi Prime, Ambassador Catherine Ross met secretly with the leaders of the Karathi people. The Karathi were tall, four-armed beings with iridescent skin that changed color with their emotions. They had been one of the first species conquered by the hegemony over 1,000 years ago. "You have proven the hegemony can be defeated," said Elder Tixval, her skin shifting to a deep blue of hope. "For centuries, we have endured their rule because we believed resistance was impossible." "It's not just possible," Catherine assured. "It's happening now, but we need allies." The Karathi weren't the only ones. Throughout the galaxy, species that had been subjugated by the hegemony saw humanity's success as a sign. Rebellions that had been small and secretive now grew bold. Resistance cells that had operated in shadows for generations suddenly found new members and new courage. Major Frank Daniels coordinated this growing network from a hidden base on Mars. Intelligence reports flowed in from 100 worlds. The Velar uprising has seized control of 3 hegemony supply depots in their system, reported his assistant Captain Kelly Barnes. "They're requesting weapons and advisors." Frank nodded. "Send what we can spare. Any word from our agents on the hegemony homeworld?" "Yes, sir. The Council is in panic. They've ordered a full military mobilization and started mass arrests of anyone suspected of human sympathies." Frank frowned. This was the downside of their initial success. The hegemony was lashing out, and innocent beings were suffering. "We need to accelerate our timetable," he decided. "Contact Admiral Winters. Tell her we need to move on Phase 2 immediately." The hegemony's crackdown was indeed brutal. On the trade hub world of Nex 5, Private Jane Collins watched in horror as hegemony soldiers rounded up civilians. Her small reconnaissance team had been sent to gather intelligence, not to engage. But as she watched the soldiers drag a family of Syrixians out of their home, she couldn't stay hidden. "This is wrong," she whispered to her team leader, Sergeant Olivia Mason. "We have our orders," Olivia replied, though her face showed she felt the same conflict. "We can't blow our cover." But when a hegemony officer struck a Syrixian child, Jane moved without thinking. She stepped out from their hiding place and called out, "Stop!" The next few minutes were chaos. Jane was quickly captured, her team forced to retreat or be caught as well. The hegemony soldiers beat her severely before taking her to their local headquarters. The interrogation that followed was broadcast across hegemony networks as a warning. They thought showing a human soldier being tortured would discourage the resistance. They were wrong. Jane Collins, bloodied and bruised, looked directly at the camera as her captors demanded she reveal human military plans. "My name is Private Jane Collins," she said, her voice steady despite her injuries. "Serial number 87249. I serve humanity and all free beings of the galaxy." No matter what they did, she repeated only those words. And when the hegemony commander threatened to execute her just as they had executed General Carter, she smiled. "Go ahead," she told him. "Every human you kill creates 1,000 more willing to fight you. We're not afraid to die for freedom." The broadcast was cut off abruptly, but it was too late. It had already been seen across 100 worlds. The hegemony had wanted to make an example of her. Instead, they had created a symbol of resistance, 2 days later, a joint team of human special forces and Karathi warriors infiltrated the prison and rescued Jane, along with hundreds of other political prisoners. The raid was led by Lieutenant George Martinez, who had volunteered specifically for this mission after seeing the broadcast. As news of the rescue spread, more species joined the fight against the hegemony. President Allison Murray addressed this growing alliance in a broadcast sent across all resistance communication channels. For 2,000 years, the hegemony has ruled through fear, she said. They believed that executing General Carter would teach humanity to be afraid. Instead, it taught us that we cannot allow tyranny to stand. Today, I promise you this. Humanity will not rest until every being in this galaxy can live free from hegemony oppression. The message was translated into 100 languages and heard on 1,000 worlds. The resistance that had begun with one human general's execution was now a galactic movement for freedom. The hegemony had never faced a serious military challenge in over 600 years. Their pride had turned to rage as human forces continued to win battles across multiple sectors. Now, they gathered their might for a single, devastating counterattack aimed at humanity's home. "They're coming," announced Vice Admiral Samuel Hill as he studied the reports on the bridge of the defense station orbiting Jupiter. Every ship they can spare. Over 2,000 vessels heading straight for Sol system. Earth's Defense Council met in the underground command center beneath Geneva. Admiral Elizabeth Winters had returned from the front lines to coordinate what would be humanity's most critical battle. "This is what we've prepared for," she told the grim-faced officers around the table. "The hegemony believes this show of force will crush us. They expect us to surrender when we see their fleet." President Murray, who had insisted on remaining on Earth despite the danger, nodded. "Then we need to show them something they don't expect." Dr. Susan Grant stepped forward, her normally calm face animated with excitement. "The shield technology is ready. We've successfully tested it on the Moon base and Mars defense platforms." For years, Dr. Grant and her team had been working on a revolutionary defense system. It created an energy field that could absorb and disperse the plasma weapons the hegemony relied on. The technology had been humanity's most closely guarded secret. "Deploy it to all ships and stations," ordered Elizabeth. "But don't activate until the hegemony opens fire. We want them to commit fully to the attack." The human fleet took positions around Saturn, using the planet's rings for cover. Vice Admiral Hill commanded from the flagship Defiance. His orders were clear. Hold the line at Saturn, prevent the hegemony from reaching the inner planets. "Enemy, fleet dropping out of FTL," reported his sensor officer. "Multiple waves, count as over 2,000 vessels confirmed." Samuel took a deep breath. His fleet numbered only 500 ships, but they had prepared for these odds. "All ships maintain position," he ordered. "Weapon systems hot, but do not fire until my command." The massive hegemony armada approached with supreme confidence. Their admiral, a veteran of dozens of campaigns against lesser species, sneered at the small human fleet. "Pathetic," he said to his officers. "This is what they offer against the might of the hegemony? Send the first wave to destroy them. The rest can proceed to their homeworld." 500 hegemony warships surged forward, their weapon systems charging. The human fleet held position, seemingly frozen in the face of overwhelming force. The first volley of plasma fire streaked across space toward the human vessels. At the last possible moment, Samuel gave the order, "Shields up!" The energy barriers snapped into place around each human ship. The hegemony weapons fire struck the shields and dissipated harmlessly, absorbed and converted into power for the human systems. "Return fire," Samuel ordered calmly. Human ships unleashed their own weapons, not the standard energy weapons the hegemony expected, but a new kind of missile that carried specially designed EMP warheads. The missiles bypassed hegemony shields, which were designed to stop energy weapons, not physical objects. On the planet Mars, Colonel Patricia Adams watched the battle unfold from her command post. Her ground forces were ready if any hegemony ships broke through. But as she observed the space combat, her worry turned to hope. "The shields are working," she told her officers, "and they have no defense against our new weapons." The first wave of the hegemony fleet was in chaos. Ship after ship went dark as the EMP weapons shut down their systems. The human fleet pressed forward, no longer outnumbered as hundreds of enemy vessels drifted powerless. The hegemony admiral ordered his second wave to advance, adjusting their tactics. This time they attempted to overwhelm specific sections of the human line, concentrating fire on what they believed would be weak points. But the human ships simply strengthened their shields in those areas, redirecting power as needed. And behind the front lines, Dr. Grant activated the Carter Protocol for the first time. Named for the executed general, it was a weapon system designed to target hegemony command ships specifically. It used their own communication networks against them, following the signals back to their source and delivering targeted data packages that rewrote critical ship functions. One by one, hegemony command vessels began to turn away from the battle, their navigation systems compromised. Some even fired on their own ships, unable to distinguish friend from foe. The Battle of Saturn's Rings lasted 14 hours. When it ended, the mighty hegemony armada was in full retreat. Over 800 of their ships had been disabled or destroyed. The rest fled back toward hegemony space, their confidence shattered. The human fleet had lost only 37 vessels. "They're running," Samuel informed Earth Command, his voice tired but triumphant. "The Sol system is secure." Across human colonies, people celebrated their first major victory. The hegemony, for the first time in centuries, had been defeated in a large-scale military engagement. The galaxy would never be the same. Victory brought new challenges. 1 month after the Battle of Saturn's Rings, the United Earth Congress gathered to discuss the future of the war. What had begun as a response to a single act of injustice had grown into a conflict that spanned hundreds of star systems. President Allison Murray stood before the representatives, her face showing the strain of weeks of difficult decisions. "We have proven that the hegemony can be defeated," she said. "Now we must decide what victory looks like." The room was divided. Some wanted to push forward, to dismantle the hegemony completely. Others argued for a negotiated peace now that humanity had shown its strength. "The hegemony has ruled through fear for 2,000 years, Murray continued. "They have enslaved dozens of species, destroyed entire civilizations that resisted them. If we stop now, if we accept peace on their terms, what happens to the allies who rose up to fight alongside us?" Secretary of State Alan Parker stood to speak. He was an older man who had initially opposed the war. "With respect, Madam President, we must consider the human cost. We've lost 5 colonies in the outer systems. Millions of our people are now refugees. How many more will die if we push for total victory?" Captain William Boyd, freshly returned from the front lines, listened from the gallery. After his successful raid on Europa 9, he had led special forces missions across hegemony space. What he had discovered troubled him deeply. When it was his turn to address the Congress, he stepped up to the podium with a data drive in his hand. "During our operations in the hegemony core systems, we uncovered evidence that certain human corporations had been collaborating with the hegemony before the war," he said, his voice steady despite the explosive nature of his claim. "These corporations provided the hegemony with intelligence about our defenses and technological capabilities." The room erupted in angry shouts. Boyd waited for order to return before continuing. "We have proof that executives from Stellar Industries and Nova Corporation met with hegemony officials 3 months before General Carter's execution. They discussed ways to maintain hegemony control over key trade routes that their companies profited from." President Murray's face had gone pale. "Are you suggesting these corporations knew about the plan to execute General Carter?" "The evidence is not conclusive," Boyd admitted, "but they certainly knew the hegemony was planning to make an example of someone high in our government." This revelation deepened the divisions. Some representatives called for immediate arrests of the corporation executives. Others questioned the evidence, suggesting it might be hegemony disinformation. As the debate raged, Admiral Elizabeth Winters received an urgent message. She slipped out of the chamber to take the call in a secure room. "The hegemony has sent peace envoys to 3 of our outer colonies," reported Major Frank Daniels. They're offering separate terms to Earth and the colonies, promising autonomy to any human settlement that breaks away from Earth authority. Elizabeth cursed softly. It was a clever tactic. Divide humanity against itself. What are the colonies saying? Most have rejected the offers outright, but New Montana and the Epsilon settlements are considering them. They were hit hard in the early fighting. She understood their temptation. Those colonies had suffered terrible losses when the hegemony targeted them in the first days of the war. I'll inform the president, she said. Keep me updated. When she returned to the chamber, the debate had grown even more heated. Secretary Parker was arguing passionately for accepting limited peace terms. We've made our point, he insisted. We've shown the galaxy that humanity cannot be pushed around. Why not end this now before more lives are lost? Because it wouldn't end, Elizabeth said, stepping forward. The hegemony is already trying to divide us. They're offering separate peace terms to our outer colonies. This news silenced the room. Everyone understood the implications. The hegemony wasn't seeking peace. They were trying to fracture humanity's unity. President Murray looked around at the troubled faces of her government. This is exactly what they want, she said quietly. For us to fight amongst ourselves, while they regroup and prepare to strike again. Ambassador Catherine Ross, who had been listening silently, stood up. We need to remember why we're fighting. This isn't just about vengeance for General Carter anymore. It's about creating. 6 months after the Battle of Saturn's Rings, the war entered its final phase. Human fleets, now joined by ships from a dozen liberated species, pushed toward the hegemony capital system. It would be the largest military operation in galactic history. Admiral Elizabeth Winters stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching as the Allied armada assembled near the jump point. 3,000 vessels of various sizes and designs, united by a common purpose, to end hegemony rule forever. Last fleet reporting in, announced her communications officer. The Karathi battle group has arrived. On the main screen, the distinctive, spiral-shaped ships of the Karathi joined the formation. They were led by Fleet Commander Zextal, who had become one of Elizabeth's most trusted allies. Open a channel to all ships, Elizabeth ordered. When the link was established, she spoke clearly and confidently. This is Admiral Winters. Today we strike at the heart of the hegemony. For 2,000 years they have ruled through fear and cruelty. Today that ends. She paused, thinking of Joseph Carter and how this had all begun with his execution. Many of us have lost friends, family, and homeworlds to hegemony aggression. But we do not fight only for vengeance. We fight for a future where no species dominates another, where justice replaces tyranny. Across the fleet, crews prepared for battle. On the Special Operations Carrier Shadow, Lieutenant George Martinez briefed his team one final time. Their mission was perhaps the most dangerous of all. Infiltrate the hegemony Central Command and disable their defense systems from within. We'll have one chance, he told the assembled soldiers. A mix of humans and aliens who had trained together for months. Once we're inside, we'll have 30 minutes to reach the control center and upload the virus. Private Jane Collins, now recovered from her ordeal and promoted to corporal, checked her equipment. After her rescue, she had volunteered for Martinez's team, determined to strike directly at the hegemony leadership. Any word from our inside contacts? She asked. George nodded. The resistance on the capital world is ready. They'll create a diversion to help us get past the outer security ring. In another part of the fleet, Dr. Susan Grant and her team prepared for their own critical mission. Intelligence had discovered that Emperor Dral Kotath had ordered ancient, doomsday weapons activated across key systems, a final, desperate move to maintain control even if the capital fell. We've identified 7 devices, she told her team of scientists and engineers. Each team will deploy to a different location. You all know what's at stake. These weapons could destroy entire planets if activated. Back on the flagship, Elizabeth received the final reports. All ships were in position. All teams were ready. It was time. Begin the jump sequence, she ordered. All ships, prepare for FTL on my mark. The massive fleet vanished into FTL space, emerging minutes later in the hegemony home system. The central, world Dralkatath Prime, hung in space before them, surrounded by defensive platforms and the remnants of the once mighty hegemony fleet. The Battle of Imperial Center began with a massive exchange of fire. The human-led forces pushed forward, their advanced shields absorbing the initial hegemony barrage. The tactics that had won at Saturn's rings were employed on a larger scale here, with Allied ships concentrating their attacks on key hegemony vessels. On the planet below, Emperor Dralkatath watched in growing rage as his defenses were systematically dismantled. The hegemony had ruled for 2 millennia. The idea of defeat was unthinkable. "Prepare my address to the Empire," he ordered his trembling aides, "and activate the protocols for the doomsday weapons." Across the system, ancient devices hidden on moons and asteroids began to power up. They had been built centuries ago as a last resort, weapons so terrible that even the hegemony had been reluctant to use them. Lieutenant Martinez's team landed on the capital world under heavy fire. Their stealth ship had been hit during the descent, forcing them to crash land 2 miles from their target. "We need to move fast," George told his team as they emerged from the smoking wreckage. "The fleet can't hold indefinitely," they began, their desperate race toward the Central Command Complex fighting through hegemony security forces. Behind them, the space battle raged. Above them, the Emperor prepared to address his empire one last time. And far away on 7 different worlds, Dr. Grant's teams raced to find and disable the ancient weapons before they could activate. The final hours of the 2,000-year hegemony had begun. The golden towers of the Imperial Palace gleamed in the twin suns of Dralkatath Prime. Once a symbol of unquestioned power, now they stood surrounded by smoke and weapons fire as the last battle for galactic freedom reached its climax. Lieutenant George Martinez and his team fought their way through the palace's outer defenses. They had lost 3 members already, but the rest pushed forward with grim determination. 5 minutes to reach the central control room," George called out as they ducked behind a fallen statue. "Jane, take point." Corporal Jane Collins moved ahead, her weapon ready. The corridors were eerily empty now, a stark contrast to the heavy resistance they had faced outside. "I don't like this," she whispered. "Where are the guards?" They got their answer when they reached the massive doors to the central chamber. Emperor Dralkatath stood waiting, surrounded by his elite Crimson Guard. The Emperor was taller than any human, his scaled skin gleaming with embedded jewels that signified his absolute authority. "You believe you can end 2,000 years of order," he hissed. "You are nothing." Brief sparks in the darkness. George activated his communication device. "Admiral, we've reached the target, but the Emperor is here. We need more time." In orbit above, Admiral Elizabeth Winters received the message as her ship shuddered from a direct hit. The space battle had turned into a brutal slugging match, with both sides taking heavy losses. "Hold your position, Lieutenant," she replied. "We're sending reinforcements." She turned to her tactical officer. "Status of the doomsday weapons?" 4 have been neutralized by Dr. Grant's teams. 3 are still active and approaching critical levels. Elizabeth made a quick decision. "Divert the Karathi battle group to support Martinez. All other ships continue pressing the attack." Across the galaxy, Dr. Susan Grant worked frantically to disable the final doomsday device on a small moon in the Rigel system. Her teams had succeeded on 3 other worlds, but 2 of those teams had not survived the process. "The encryption is adaptive," she told her engineers as they connected to the ancient machine's controls. "Every time we crack one layer, it changes." A young engineer named Kyle Rogers looked up from his screen. "What if we don't try to crack it? What if we overload it instead?" Susan considered for a moment. "That could work, but someone would need to remain to manually trigger the overload." She met his eyes, seeing the understanding there. Back at the Imperial Palace, George's team was pinned down by heavy fire when reinforcements arrived. A Karathi strike team led by Commander Zextal smashed through the ceiling, dropping into the chamber behind the Emperor's forces. "Advance!" George shouted. In the chaos, Jane managed to reach a terminal and begin uploading the virus that would disable the planetary defenses. The Emperor saw what she was doing and moved toward her with incredible speed, his ceremonial staff raised to strike. George threw himself between them. The Emperor's weapon struck him in the chest, sending him crashing to the floor. But he had bought Jane the precious seconds she needed. "Upload complete," she announced as the terminal flashed green. Across the hegemony systems, defense grids and weapon platforms went offline. The Emperor roared in fury as reports flooded in of collapsing defenses and surrendering fleets. "This cannot be. I will not allow it." He reached for an ornate device on his wrist, the trigger for the remaining doomsday weapons. But before he could activate it, Admiral Elizabeth Winter's voice boomed from every communication system in the palace. "Emperor Dral Kotath, your weapons have been neutralized. Your fleets have surrendered. It's over." On the distant moon in the Rigel system, Kyle Rogers had succeeded in overloading the ancient weapons control systems, sacrificing himself but preventing planetary destruction. Similar scenes had played out at the other locations, with brave members of Dr. Grant's teams making the ultimate sacrifice. The Emperor looked around at his fallen guards, at the determined faces of humans and their allies. For the first time in his long life, he knew defeat. 3 days later, Ambassador Catherine Ross stood in the Grand Hall of the former Imperial Palace. Representatives from over 50 species gathered to sign the founding document of the Galactic Confederation, a new alliance based on equality and mutual respect. In the center of the hall stood a simple monument, a statue of General Joseph Carter, whose execution had started the chain of events that led to this moment. President Allison Murray spoke to the assembled delegates. "Today marks the beginning of a new era," she said. "One built not on fear and domination, but on cooperation and respect. General Carter's death showed us the true nature of tyranny. How we responded showed the true nature of humanity." As the delegates signed the Galactic Charter, Admiral Elizabeth Winters stood with Major Frank Daniels at the back of the hall. "It's not quite over," Frank said quietly. "We found something in the Emperor's private archives. Evidence that another force may have been manipulating events all